Hey guys, how you doing? So Dan from Trading with Dan here. So I just wanted to have a little chat with you guys about a book I read. This is the book. Obviously I've got more time to read, more time on my hands these days. I mean, I'm busy with a number of projects that I'm working on, but I still have got more time to read. But yeah, so what this book is called, it's called The Dragons and the Snakes, How the Rest Learned to Fight the West. And by the West, they pretty much mean America. So I'll pretty much sum up the analogy and sort of how it works. So what happened was, we originally had America basically at war with Russia, sort of a Cold War. Obviously Russia been a pretty big superpower, and so they're sort of classed as dragons. So America is a big dragon, Russia is a big dragon, and then as the 20th century, 21st century wore on, it became more of a America was less at wars and war in a lot of places across the world, but it wasn't really with another big superpower. Sorry, not supervisor. So they didn't really go to war with other dragons. But what happened is when America, because obviously how America works, basically what happened with Iraq, Saddam basically thought he could take on America in like a traditional war, like an open battlefield war, and obviously quickly and easily lost that war, pretty emphatically. So that literally was the lesson for every other country that had problems with America. That was where how they learned, how they adapted to obviously not get into that sort of warfare again. So they would obviously do more guerrilla warfare, insurgency type warfare, and yeah, sort of decentralized cells, pockets of armed groups, and not just obviously an open battlefield type war. So that they are basically in the book what they mean by the snakes. So obviously you have lots of these snakes around the world causing all sorts of problems for the US, in lots of different countries. I do say they're causing problems for the US. Obviously the US is in all these countries trying to project its power, and these countries were fighting back in this way, that is, in the analogies, is like as a snake would fight, with more basically sort of stealth sneakiness, trying to basically not have to fight the dragon on the dragon's terms in a way that it's going to struggle. So this brings us to where we're at now. So America has originally was concentrating on other dragons on the world stage, such as Russia. It then began to concentrate on the snakes, and it got itself pretty preoccupied in various places with these wars that seem to go on forever because there's no real way for them to end them. And what has now happened is that the other dragons have risen again, now that they have realised that the West has basically been caught up with it's wars it's basically spread itself thin across the world, fighting lots of obviously inferior foes, but they can't just use the full force of their technology on an open battlefield. They obviously can't just nuke the countries. So what's happened now? China has learned obviously from how the West fights from, and obviously it's still not going to take the West on in open warfare, but they are trying. They have basically how China works. It's called I can't remember what the book was called now. Unrestricted warfare. That's what it's called. See if I can find it for you. Unrestricted warfare. Yeah, I did actually have a look at this before. Unrestricted warfare, and yeah, China's master plan to destroy America. I mean, it's a pretty clear title there. Obviously, this is written in Chinese by a Chinese general, and it pretty much outlines how just every interaction between China and the West, China and America, is done in a way to try and gain advantage and try and basically to win a war with America. But they don't just mean like a kinetic sort of like a battlefield, a battle in the sky, a naval battle. They mean in all sorts of different ways. It's like cyber warfare, like propaganda warfare, economic warfare, and then actual kinetic warfare. But they do even go about that a different way, like how, for example, they're building like island chains around around China, basically the South China Sea, to project their power there, because they pretty much know the American naval military is pretty powerful. Obviously, although they've got problems now with the admiral, whoever is the captain of the I can't remember what the ship's called. It may be called I don't know what it's called, but they're basically the main aircraft carrier that's out near China is basically disabled, and that's why they've been doing like these sorts of shows of force. I think they're called elephant walks, where with all their aeroplanes and bombers and B-52s and etc. to basically just tell China, look, we are here and we are ready. This is in Guam, but yeah, so they build these chains. I mean, obviously you can't sink an island chain. You can put a load of ordnance on it, a load of like anti-aircraft carrier, anti-air missiles, and it's the way of projecting power. So it's a clever way of doing it. And people have argued the Belt and Road Initiative. Obviously America has a naval dominance, but if China has a belt and road, I mean, it has a land. It can project its power over the land and doesn't have to worry about controlling the seas. Obviously America is a separate continent away from obviously China, the Middle East and Europe is all basically, and Russia is actually, it's all one landmass, isn't it? It's all connected, whereas obviously America isn't. So America obviously needs its naval power. China could realistically, I don't know how realistic it is, but could travel, could move forces just purely across land. But also what China's done, they've developed hypersonic missiles that can literally destroy aircraft carriers anyway. It would be pretty difficult. I mean, I think we have basically just general like ordnance, you know what I mean, missiles and things like that. They, like non-nuclear basically ones, have got to the point now where they can pretty much wipe out any sort of conventional war machine, i.e. like a plane, boat, well, maybe not submarines, but again, submarines are there to fire nuclear weapons. So if we're not talking nuclear wars, then it's pretty much a stalemate. So yeah, and then why I talk about war with China. I mean, yeah. So I wasn't talking about all the different methods. I mean, even like Iran doesn't have big aircraft carriers, but it just has swarms of little boats it builds that can obviously swarm around bigger boats, shoot at them, fire missiles from them, and that's how they sort of are looking to counteract obviously just the brute force of the American military. But why I talk about this is because I mean, if you guys can think back to Christmas before you heard anything about this global pandemic that was going to happen, and then think how quickly everything changed within basically 3 months. If you can understand that the world can change so much, your life, you don't go to work anymore, you don't leave your house, you don't go near another person, etc. If you can understand that much can change so quickly, then you can possibly understand that things can change that much that quickly. So as this economic fallout of what is going on, because I think people do underestimate economy's ability and the world, what the world is going to be like going forwards. I mean, it isn't going to be the same as the past. We're not going to have a V-shaped recovery and a return to norm. Things are going to change. How countries trade are going to change. Who they trade with, and what they trade and things like that. I mean, supply chains are going to have to be changed. I mean, basically the global just-in-time highly efficient supply chain is basically broken, and that isn't coming back. So I mean, people might argue, think it is, but it isn't. Basically, like it isn't coming back, and that is going to cause, like, obviously lots of disruption with how things are built and made, how things are supplied to the people that need them, basically. So each individual country is going to have or group of countries that do, obviously, like maybe Europe, that obviously countries in Europe that do necessarily can work together a bit better, even though obviously this pandemic has shown that even countries within Europe aren't necessarily too bothered about helping out other ones, even when it comes just to a simple thing of printing more money or issuing bonds. I mean, Germany didn't want to help Italy. So, I mean, maybe I'm even underestimating that. So maybe every country needs to develop its own capacity to, one, feed itself, to two, keep its health up, so basically make medicines, to three, provide its own security, because they can't necessarily rely on being in like a group of other countries. And yeah, there's going to be lots of things that are going to change, and then obviously to provide electronic equipment, whatever, things like that. I mean, and then obviously supply all the what currently are cheap, the cheap, lower cost, mass produced items that predominantly come from like China, that countries are then going to also have to try and make some of those themselves. So whilst these aren't necessarily bad that countries be able to do things like that, what it is bad for is just corporate profits and the existing financial system, the existing, basically, world we have. It's not basically going to result in as profitable companies. It's going to result in high prices, which just means people are going to be more careful with their spending. People are going to save after this anyway, because people are going to have seen this happen, and they're going to be like, well, I'm going to have to think about saving some money when maybe I didn't save money before. People's habits are going to change. People going out are going to change, how they're going to interact in the wider world. I mean, lots are going to change because of this. More so the relationship between other countries. I mean, I'm telling you now, when this has basically got under control, there is then going to be a big backlash against China. They are going to be, people are going to want to hold them responsible for what they've done, basically, and it's going to cause big problems. And that basically brings me round or full circle back to my first point, this unrestricted warfare. Basically how basically China is going to have its back to the wall. It's gonna be struggling. It's gonna have a lot of people hungry. It's gonna have a massive loss to its GDP, its economy, its monopoly money is going to be like, which isn't even accepted worldwide anyway. I mean, the RMB that is basically, I think it accounts for like 1% of world trade. Basically, think people don't transact in RMB, in the Chinese currency, Chinese monopoly money. They have to use dollars. So China is basically is starved of dollars, and is getting further starved of dollars because the Fed is extending currency swaps to basically other central banks, but not China. So China is going to be backed into a corner. First and foremost, though, the conflict is going to be firstly the actual Chinese people against the Chinese Communist Party. So there's obviously a lot of them, but obviously the CCP have a lot of control. I mean, they've invested a lot of time and effort in technology, in AI, in tracking, in cameras, in just everything to try and control their population, because they are fully aware that they are pretty much a bad regime, and the people don't like them. They've got to control these people, because if they lose control of those people, then they're all dead. Basically, they're all going to got. They're not going to have anywhere really to refuge around the world. And yeah, so so that basically. But if they do overcome that, and they do get solidarity within their own population, possibly against the West, then maybe they can then basically go to war with the West, which I can see them having to do, because they're basically backed into a corner economically, yeah, even well, not militarily. I mean, the rest of the world would be happy just to let China just basically decay in itself, in its own country and within its own borders. But we all know that sort of thing doesn't happen. And then there is basically the old saying of how things work. You first you have currency wars, and there's been basically a currency war with the Chinese currency, keeping it too cheap to build basic trading balances, and then you get trade wars, which obviously we've had trade wars with Trump, and then those trade wars eventually break down and lead to kinetic wars, which basically is possibly coming. So yeah, so it's a pretty gloomy picture, but basically with the breakdown in supply chains, with no one really knowing how long this is going on for, no one really factoring how people's habits are going to change, nobody really factoring in and the implications of all the money that's been spent, no one really factoring in the fact that we're not going to basically just go back to normal and restart our economies as there are. They are very difficult times ahead, very difficult times, a lot more difficult than you realise, and a lot more difficult and different between just a 3-month period between Christmas and 3 months after Christmas. So if you think how much your life has changed since then, you could probably 2x that change between what's going to happen probably by the end of this year, especially when well, in the northern hemisphere at least, the weather gets colder anyway. So obviously flus don't basically particularly like the heat as much. Not that there's necessarily evidence that, I mean, that it's getting slowed down by the heat, but I can't see it not being worse during the winter. So we've got difficult times ahead, and these are going to force the world into difficult positions. I mean, there's a lot of countries that are in a lot of trouble anyway as it is. I mean, there are countries even like South Africa, Hong Kong, Venezuela, Mexico even. These are all pretty much failed states by now. Mexico's basically run by cartels. Venezuela is obviously a failed state. Hong Kong is basically collapsing due to China trying to take it back over. South Africa is a very unstable country now, and they do produce a lot of agriculture, a lot of food. There's a massive swarm of locusts, and I think there's actually another massive form, like literally like a super swarm that's eating a lot of food. So there's going to be food problems. Obviously we've got swine flu, we've got army worm in China, and I don't know if they've got a bird flu outbreak again, but that's obviously affects people. But I mean, the swine flu and the army worm, they affect agricultural products. So there's going to be a huge food shortage. Food is going to cost more because there's a shortage and because of supply chains. So you're not going to be able to get certain foods, or they're going to be a lot higher prices, and you're just going to have to basically eat whatever your country produces. Lots of countries don't produce enough food. There will be net importers of food. The UK here where I am is a net importer of food. America's not actually a net importer. China is a net importer. Lots of places in Africa are net importers. So these places are going to struggle, and they're going to start causing a lot of problems for themselves and other neighbouring countries and areas, and just generally the whole situation. I mean, it's a pretty bleak outlook, but this is what's coming, guys. I mean, you can set aside whatever rescue package for the financial system that they can come up with, and even if they fully fix the financial system, and that's all fine, up and running, no problems there, which I think is practically impossible as it is in its current state. But assuming they did, that isn't the main problem. There's a breakdown in relationships between countries. There's a breakdown of supply chains. There's a breakdown of there's a change in, basically there will be a change in people's behavior afterwards, how they're gonna consume things, how much they're gonna save, where they're gonna go, what they're gonna do, where they're gonna spend money. And that's obviously all gonna have an effect on who has jobs, which then that's like a vortex doom loop, isn't it? So then it's gonna be even worse for the economy because they've not got jobs, and then that's then gonna be worse for everything. But yes, we've got bad times ahead, guys. Things are going to change, and things are probably going to kick off with China, because they're getting backed into a corner, and they can't not be backed into a corner. They can't just be given a pass because of what's happened, and they won't be given a pass because of what's happened. And then on top of all that, we're going to have the problem with basically the general public, the general population, which doesn't quite understand, especially in America, doesn't quite understand, hasn't quite got the grasp of the central bank is just printing so much money to bail out rich people, and the poor people are basically losing all their jobs, not being given much money to compensate, and are basically screwed. Whilst basically all the rich people, shareholders, corporations are all getting bailed out with so much money. I think I read a statistic where so far the Fed has basically printed per person in America about $40,000, and it's basically going to give each American $1,200 of that $40,000, and then basically the pretty much other $38,800 is just been given to banks, corporations, and basically to keep rich people's asset prices up. So once they do start to get a grasp of that, which they will get a grasp, it'll spread around, and there will be a lot of social unrest. And don't forget, Americans are badasses, aren't they? They got guns. Do you know what I mean? They stand up for their rights. They're not like pathetic people in this country that I live in, where they don't stand up for their rights, and they're basically absolutely pathetic. But yeah, they're not as pathetic in America, so they are going to stand up and do what they basically want to do. So I mean, America's going to be sidetracked with that. There's going to then obviously be the virus concerns. China's going to be sidetracked also with virus concerns, with its population trouble, and then also with the rest of the world trouble. So everybody's getting trouble from all angles. They're getting trouble from their people. They're getting trouble from the actual financial system that they have to operate in. They're getting trouble from their economies, which are then not doing so well. Then they're going to get trouble with their supply chains and their relationships then with other countries. So it's pretty bleak, guys. And if you want to try and tell me there's actually, I'm just talking rubbish, none of this is going to happen and we're just going to go back to normal, then you are basically deluded. So yeah, so there you go. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know how long this video has gone on for. It's pretty negative. 22 minutes, there we go. It's pretty negative stuff, guys, but I mean, you just got to prepare in the best way that you can for what is coming. You need to expect the unexpected. You've been given a warning with how much things have changed, how much your life has changed in the past 3 months, in only 3 months. So give it another 3 months, give it another 6 months, give it another year, right? Just think how much the situation, your situation, the country situation, life for human beings on this planet, think how much that can change within a year. And it's a lot. Humans have this thing called recency bias, where and mean reversion. You think things are going to go back to what they were, go back to normal. Like, things might get a bit crazy, but then they'll go back to normal. But yeah, that's part of the human psyche, and that's basically what is not allowing a lot of you guys to understand where we are going. So yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, I'm doing everything I can to try and make myself anti-fragile, to try and give myself and my family like the best chance I can with what is going to happen, with how things are potentially going to be. And then if by some miracle, like literally some actual miracle, some absolute miracle, I mean, I don't know how this can happen, but if some miracle, things change, maybe aliens come down, give us like a perpetual like free energy machine, a free food machine, yeah, like maybe we'll be okay. But failing that miracle, there's no real way this is going to be avoided. This is basically our future. We're going to go into a depression that is going to make the last real depression in the 1930s seemed like a walk in the park, and like unemployment figures are skyrocketing to levels way worse than that depression. The actual reduction in GP is way worse than that depression. The actual amount of debt that's been carried by the economy, the actual credit, because the 1930s was like a credit boom, bust, a credit bust. It's more now, it's bigger than what we've got now. Everything is set to basically hit the fan as it were. Thanks for listening to that, guys. I mean, I hope you guys can take some at least take something from that and try and do at least some form of preparation for how the world economy is gonna go looking forwards. Things aren't just gonna go back to normal. There we go. Anyway, so thanks for listening, guys, and speak to you soon.